contemplate together the power of humility, the power of taking the last place, the power of forgiveness, the power of mercy that
We are
see.
called to be light in a dark world. We are called to be love for those who know not love. Those of us who know Christmas are called to be living incarnations of Christmas in our world.
When we invite
Not
the
just
lonely
in
to our
December.
dinner tables, when we love in the face of hate, when we practice compassion, when we pursue justice, we once again put flesh and bone on the divine and put on display in ourselves that yes, God is here.
My name is Kim Lucas, and it is my pleasure to serve as Bishop of the Episcopal Church of Colorado. What makes Christmas real for you? This was a question my friend Lily asked me a few years ago. Lily and her family had immigrated to the United States from Ethiopia, and Christmas here in the United States was a mystery to her. Lily's family didn't celebrate Christmas in December. They celebrated Christmas in January on what we in the church call the Feast of the Epiphany, or Three Kings Day. Lily's gospel wasn't the Gospel of Luke that Linus so beautifully and eloquently recites in its Christmas Charlie Brown. Her gospel of Christmas was the story of the three kings coming to see a child that the skies foretold. It's the story of Mary and Joseph fleeing as refugees to Egypt to protect their son from Herod's wrath. Her Christmas story was very different, and she wondered to me what made Christmas real. It was one of those questions that takes you aback. I had to think about it long and hard. I had to think about the real meaning of Christmas to me and what that meant in my life. It took me a while to come up with an answer about what made Christmas real. And then I had to ask the question, when did Christmas become real for me? The answer that came to me was Christmas became very real for me when I was 6 months pregnant, diagnosed with meningitis, in the hospital, and the doctors were saying that they didn't know if I would survive or if my twin babies would survive. In the moment of all of that terror, I remember experiencing a profound sense of peace. And a voice whispered to me, "It is well." I thought I knew what those words meant, but in that moment, what I heard them as was a promise. It wasn't a promise of my survival. It wasn't a promise that I would be faced with the uncertainty of premature twins. It wasn't even a promise that my heart wouldn't be broken by the loss of one or both of my twins. The promise was that I would experience nothing without God's presence in my life. It is well was a promise of what we hear at Christmas, the promise of Emmanuel, of God with us. That there is nothing we will endure, no real life circumstance will suffer, nothing in our lives will be such that we have to endure it alone, that God is with us. And that's what makes Christmas real. I'd like to say that in my everyday life, I get to exist in this bubble of absolute peace and serenity, but it's not the case. I'm stressed out as a mom. I'm worried about work. I have all sorts of issues that lots of other people deal with, like an aging mom, kids in college, all of the things that stress me out. And I don't always have that sense of peace. But in my church, we gather together and we share a sacred meal, often called the Lord's Supper or Holy Communion. We call it Holy Eucharist. And in that time, we are called by Jesus to remember when we experienced Christ's presence in our life, to remember that even when we feel alone, God is with us. The question is, once we know that God is with us, once we have community that can remind us that we are not alone, how then do we live in the world? We live in the world as people who proclaim and live love in the face of hate, who proclaim and live peace in the face of violence. We live and proclaim justice in the face of oppression. We live and proclaim that God's presence is for us all, that none of us is beyond the scope of God's love. We welcome one another as Christ welcomes us. In our world, there are still refugees. There are parents fleeing tyrants for the safety of their children. There are people who are going hungry. And those of us who have been gifted with this experience of Emmanuel, those of us who know Christmas, are called to be living incarnations of Christmas in our world. Not just in December, but year-round. We are called to be light in a dark world. We are called to be love for those who know not love. We are called to remind everyone that we are God's beloved and that God is indeed with us. It may be hard to figure out how to live this life in our current circumstances, but that's why we have community. We have community to remind us how it is we walk in the way of Christ, how it is we live Christ's love in the world, how it is we turn our hearts again and again from the darkness, from the despair, from the frustration, from the anger, to the love that has been made manifest for us. Our God came into a real world with all of its brokenness, with all of its terror, with all of its sadness, and proclaimed that all of us are loved. And that's what makes Christmas real, that God is indeed with us.